Buckhead Church. Woo! It's 9 o'clock in the morning. Let's go. We are so excited that each and every one of you are here. If you're watching online, we are excited that you're here. And this is just going to be an amazing day. So we want to invite you to stand to your feet as we start this time of celebration, as we sing unto our God. This song simply says that God is worthy of our praise. Come on. Stories of a Savior, holiness and human hands, treasures for the traitor. No ear had heard, no eye had seen the image of the Father until heaven came to live with me, a rescue like no other. You are worthy
Because you're worthy, we could all gladly say, yes, I will. Come on, let's continue to sing together. I count on one thing. The same God that never fails will not fail me now. You won't fail me now in the waiting. The same God who's never late is working all things out. You're working all things out. Sing it out, say. Yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley. Yes, I will bless your name. Yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy in all my days. Oh, yes, I will. Oh, 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 yes, I will. Oh, help me say it. I count on one thing. The same God that never fails will not fail me now. You won't fail me now in the waiting. The same God who's never late is working all things out. You're working all things out. Oh yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley. Yes, I will bless your name. Yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy in all my days. Oh yes, I will for all my days. Go, sing it out. I choose to praise, to glorify, glorify the name of all names. That nothing can stand against. I choose to praise, to glorify, glorify the name of all names. Come on, sing it out, say. I choose to praise. Put your hands together like this. Come on. To glorify, glorify the name of all names. That nothing can stand against. I choose to praise, to glorify, glorify one more name. That nothing can stand against. Yes, go. Lift you high in the lowest valley. Yes, I will bless your name. Yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy in all my days. Oh yes, I will for all my days. Go for all my days. Yes, I will. Hey, Buckhead Church, we are so excited. This morning we have a baptism. So if you don't mind directing your attentions to the screen as we listen or we hear Chantel's story this morning. Thank you.
My name is Chantel Cobbs. Growing up, I was brought up in a Christian home. I used to go to church a lot with my mom, and I even did some praise dancing. Recently, I was actually in a season of feeling very alone, high anxiety. Really felt like I was at a standstill in my life. I really didn't get out much. I used to always kind of say that my life was pretty much on autopilot. In 2019, I actually gave birth to my daughter. When I was 5 months pregnant, I was actually involved in a major car accident with her. And on impact, the first name that I yelled out was Jesus. I feel like he was there with me all along, and I know that I can depend on him. He has also been my provider. My first leap of faith in Jesus Christ was when I decided to leave corporate, actually become an entrepreneur. Philippians 4:13 says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I'm excited to live this meaningful life.
Yes. Chantel, my favorite part about your story is how you said that because of the anxieties and just stresses of life, you felt like you were on autopilot, right? That you weren't really actively pursuing Jesus. Then you have this moment that's really scary. Thank God you're okay. Thank God Marley's okay. And your initial instinct was to call on Jesus' name. And what that reminds me and what that can remind all of us this morning and anyone who gets to hear your story is that our Heavenly Father is always pursuing us. He's always after our hearts, and He's ready to meet us where we're at. And so I'm so proud of you for sharing your story. I'm so excited to think about you modeling this for your sweet girl. And it's because of your public profession of faith in Jesus that it's my honor to baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
I know that it takes so much courage to share your story. So Chantel, we are so grateful that you were willing to share your story with us this morning. And today we are going to be talking about the power of community. And in Chantel's story, she talks about the feelings of being alone and what that feels like. And I know from actually getting a chance to talk with Chantel this morning that she has been searching for a church home for a really long time. And it was through coming to Buckhead Church that she found her place to belong. So I think Chantel's story really reminds us of the power of community. And last weekend, I got to be a part of a weekend that I think really also reminded me of the power of community. I'm the high school pastor here at Buckhead, and last weekend we had our annual senior weekend where we got to take our seniors from all campuses away for the weekend together. And I just want you guys, I really just want to read something that one of our seniors, Avery, mentioned on social media, actually after the weekend. When the weekend was done, Avery posted a bunch of pictures about her time at senior weekend, but there was something she wrote that I wanted to read to you guys that I really feel like sums up her entire church experience. And here's what Avery had to say. She said, "Saying I love my church is the biggest understatement of a lifetime. They've showed me what it looks like to actually be happy with life. They've showed me how glorious life can be when we have Jesus. They've showed me how to be content in a world where rest doesn't seem like an option. I will forever be grateful for a place where I have found ultimate community. Buckhead Inside Out, you are the greatest thing to ever happen to me. You've shown me God, and there's nothing more beautiful than that." Now, I don't know about you guys, but I wish that I had the type of faith that Avery has as a senior in high school. Yeah. Like, she gets it. She understands the most important thing of life, and she also understands how important it is to be connected to community. And our hope for every single one of you is that you find a place to belong, that you find community just like Chantel and Avery have. And then honestly, for some of you in the room, for those of you who invest in our church, who give financially, you are a part of stories like Chantel's and Avery's. You are a part of helping us to create environments where people are able to get connected and experience who Jesus is. And we truly could not do what we do without you. And so in just a moment, we're going to hear from Joel. But before we do that, I want to give a chance to all of you to invest financially in what we're doing at Buckhead. We're going to put a QR code and a website on the screen. And we would love to give you the opportunity to give, to be a part of what God is doing through stories like Chantel's and Avery's. And for those of you who choose to give, thank you so much.
Do you remember the moment? Do you remember the moment when you first realized that this COVID-19 thing was serious? Do you remember that moment? Some of us, you could take yourself back to that place. Some of us are going to enjoy this, maybe a dozen of us. The rest of us, you can endure it for a minute. It'll be meeting for all of us in just a few minutes, but I just want to take you back for just a second. For me, it was on a Wednesday. At a Wednesday, I had this moment. I was at home, and I know it was a Wednesday because we had small group at our previous church before we moved here. We had small group at our home every Wednesday night. And that meant we have 4 kids. That meant on Wednesday after dinner, my job was to go through and clean up the entire disaster in our house so that nobody knew the disaster that we lived in at home. And they walked into our beautiful house on Wednesday evenings. And so I'm cleaning up at home, and there's an NBA basketball game on. And at halftime of the game, they announced that they're suspending the game. As a matter of fact, the announcer said that they're suspending the entire NBA season. And I thought, that can't be. And so I opened up my app on my phone, my ESPN app, and I realized not only that, but they were canceling March Madness, which was unthinkable to me. And then this next one really caught my attention. I found out they postponed the Masters. And when I saw that, I was like, oh, okay, this is a thing. Like, this is going to affect my life, and this is going to affect our world. For some of you, it was when flights were canceled and you couldn't travel for work, or you began working at home, or schools were closed and your kids went online, started doing school digitally. Some of you, it was after that when your world started, your style, your social life began cramped by theaters closing down and restaurants doing curbside only, and you couldn't really go out and do anything. And when you went out to the stores, like the shelves were empty. You remember, like, you couldn't get toilet paper? Shame on those of you who were toilet paper hoarders in that season. May God have mercy on your soul. This was like a really interesting thing that was going on. We learned new language, like sheltering in place and social distancing. This is the hard thing for me to believe, is that was just 20 months ago. Isn't that crazy? It was only 20 months ago that all of this began happening. I remember calling a meeting with my previous church team, our staff. I called them together and I said, hey, listen, I'm not totally sure, but I think we may need to hold services online only for a couple of weeks. A couple of weeks. Isn't that so cute? Like, I was like completely misunderstood and miscalculated the severity of this deal. And it was like we were then forced to deal with stay-at-home orders and mandatory shutdowns and mask requirements and contact tracing and quarantining. These are things that were like not part of our lives ever before. And as a society, in reality, I think this is the thing that gets doesn't get talked about as much. We didn't necessarily know how to cope with that. And so we looked quickly for ways to escape. And one of the first places we looked was this right here. Anybody remember this? I mean, this was like a crazy phenomenon. And honestly, I'm not a psychologist, but I think the psychology was, this is crazier than what's happening in my real life. And so I can escape to this and realize, like, life's not that crazy. We escaped into things like that, and Netflix in general, into fantasy world. TikTok dancing became a thing in most households. Marco Polo. Like where that came from, where we started Marco Poloing. Versus battles, if you missed that, Timbaland introduced us to something that music could do when there was no concerts. It was extraordinary. I don't know if you know this, our internet usage in 2020, any guesses? 1.2 billion years worth of internet usage in the United States in 1 year. Our internet usage exploded. Another thing that exploded was athleisure wear. It's a new word. And we're all so grateful. I thought you would cheer for that, because like athleisure wear is amazing. It's like I don't have to wear real clothes anywhere. I can wear my pajamas everywhere with athleisure clothing. Did you know that prior to the pandemic, the athleisure market was 80 billion? That was the athleisure market. And in 2020, the athleisure market was $284 billion. I mean, this is our world. A lot of the things that we don't realize, like, just happen. Home gyms. We created home gyms, home offices, created all sorts of reno projects. We spent $420 billion on home reno projects in 2020. Now, a lot of this stuff you can find all over the place. It's well documented. There's lots of industries that began. Some of you pivoted with it. That was another word we learned, was to pivot. You pivoted in your work or in your industry, or you joined a new industry, or some of you saw this coming. You jumped in, you were smart, you were ahead of things, and you benefited from it. But the things that weren't well documented were the heavier things. Like this, like alcohol sales, it went up by 55%, 243% online. Opioid overdoses increased in 30 states. Domestic violence nationally increased by 15 to 20%. It varied state by state. Our mental health decreased in a massive way. Anxiety and depression increased by 400% nationally. On top of that, the social and political tensions in our nation multiplied this by tenfold in many of our lives as we collectively experience this social ache. Did you know many sociologists, as they're already looking, we're really early into the 21st century, but they're looking at the greatest impacts on life and society in the 21st century, and obviously the pandemic is one of them, but many sociologists think that the pandemic will eclipse both 9/11 and the Great Recession in its impact on our society. It's overwhelming. And week after week, here's the thing, we don't think about this that often, but week after week, we experience what I'll call the hangover effects of the pandemic. I have a friend whose child was exposed, and they had to quarantine, and because of that, they couldn't go to school, and they had to leave work. And I just remember in a moment of frustration, they were like, "I'm so tired of COVID." And I thought, really? Just now? Like, you're way behind. Like, all the rest of us have been really tired of it for a really long time. Another person I heard say, "My sponge is full." I was like, "What do you mean by that?" They're like, it just keeps coming. The effects of this keep coming, and I can't absorb any more of it. Today, I want to talk for just a couple minutes about one of the most dangerous things that I'll call a hangover effect of the pandemic, and it's this ache of isolation. I don't know that it's been given a name, and I'm not sure that this is the best name, but there's this collective ache that we felt, that it's a hangover from the physical isolation that we were forced into in that season. And much of what we've seen in the past 20 months is people being pushed beyond their emotional pain tolerance, leading them to cry out and act out and lash out and check out on life and check out on careers and check out on marriages and families. And many checked out on faith in this season. This global physical health crisis led also to a mental, emotional, and I'll even say a spiritual health crisis in our nation. And it's not something people are talking about very much. And the reason I think it happened is because we weren't designed for isolation. Now, there's this fascinating story. If you have a Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John are the four Gospels. In Mark chapter 1, near the end of the first chapter, we're told a story, most likely given the information given to Mark, who was the author, by Peter, who was one of Jesus' closest followers. And in Mark chapter 1, there's this story, there's this encounter that Jesus had with a man that's eerily relevant to what we're experiencing in our society. And this guy was in such distress that he actually breaks a mandatory quarantine in his life. And the context of this is Jesus has been healing a bunch of people. The first few verses we find out Jesus is healing people. People hear the word and they start to flock to Jesus. And a man with leprosy, which was a skin disease, leprosy, came and he knelt in front of Jesus. Now, for most of us, we don't think that's a big deal, but imagine someone you know is COVID-19 positive. You know they're COVID-19 positive. They come up to you and they kneel down right in front of you without a mask. And they're coughing on you. Catching the picture now? This is sort of what's happening in this moment. Now, leprosy is an interesting thing because in the Bible, and specifically in the first century, there was a bunch was known about it, but there was a lot yet to be discovered. And but this was such a serious thing that years before, in fact, about 1,400 years prior to that, in Leviticus, there was 2 chapters that were written in the law to protect people. Now, I just want you to think, this is extraordinary. This is before anything was known about microbes or germs or bacteria or viruses. We didn't know about any of that stuff scientifically. There's over 100 verses in Leviticus 13 and 14 describing how you protect yourself from this disease. In fact, in Leviticus 13, I'll just read a portion of it. It says, those who suffer from a serious skin disease, that was referring to leprosy, they must tear their clothing and leave their hair uncombed. They must cover their mouth and call out unclean, unclean. This is how they were to identify themselves as having leprosy. And as long as this serious disease lasts, they will be ceremonially unclean. This was something that was a mark that was placed on people. And they must live in isolation in their place outside the camp. They were completely excluded from Jewish society. If we were to read on, this is just a little more interesting about leprosy. Do you know, it told specifically how far you could be away from other people? Like this was the law. If you got caught, this was actually punishable by stoning. If you were upwind from somebody, listen, literally, this is in the Bible. This is written 3,500 years ago, about 1,400 years before the time of Jesus. About 3,500 years ago, it said if you were upwind, you needed to stay 100 cubits from somebody, which is about 150 feet. If you're downwind, you need to stay about 4 cubits. You need to be 4 cubits because you're downwind. You're not as likely to spread this disease to other people. Did you know that 4 cubits, some of you are good with math, you're really, really fast, 4 cubits is about 6 feet. How about that? Social distancing 3,500 years ago. See, something we thought was so new. This is extraordinary. God in his law tried to protect people. But in this society, people were relegated to be outside the community. Contact with this guy would render you unclean. It would cause you to be isolated, disconnected from society, void of human connection. And recklessly, this is back to Mark chapter 1, recklessly, he just comes right up to Jesus. And he kneels down in front of him. He doesn't identify himself as unclean. He disregards the proper social distancing etiquette, which again, legally, he could have been stoned for it. The man, back to verse 1 of Mark, this man with leprosy came and knelt in front of Jesus, begging to be healed. And this is what he said. He said, if you're willing, you can heal me and you can make me clean, he said. Now, a careful examination of what he's asking is not about him being healed from the disease. That's not his deepest pain. As a matter of fact, his deepest pain isn't physical, and we know this because today, medically, we know that Hansen's disease is what we call this today. It's what we call leprosy. It's not this rotting infection that most people thought leprosy was. People were deformed by numbness. They literally couldn't feel their limbs, and so they looked like deformed because it looked like the body was rotting, but that's not what was happening. Their body's warning system was disarmed, and they couldn't feel things that were hot or things that were going to hurt them. And that wasn't his ultimate desire. In fact, it's been described as a painless hell. It doesn't actually have pain associated with it. His deepest desire was to be clean. He says, you can heal me and make me clean, because in their society, to be deemed as unclean was to be isolated, was to be set away, was to be taken away from society. If we're honest, come on. Some of us are going, okay, when is COVID gonna be gone? But getting over COVID isn't the ache. Recovering what was lost is the ache. Most people are going, when are things gonna return to normal? And then you have the other people that are the realists, they're going, things are never going back to normal. Or we've heard terms like, there's a new normal. Things are completely changing, and there's an ache inside of us because something was stolen, something was taken away, something was removed, something was lost that we weren't ready to give up. And I don't know what that thing is for you. But in this guy's life, the idea of being unclean removed him from his family. And it didn't make him just unapproachable. It made him undesirable and unacceptable and unlovable. He's plagued by the ache of physical, mental, and emotional isolation. And he comes to Jesus, who he knows can heal him. And it's not the disease that he's worried about. It's wanting to be reconnected, wanting to regain what was lost. Look at Jesus' response. Jesus, moved with compassion, Now, what you need to know in their society is when it came to sickness, people thought people deserved that. They thought maybe you sinned, or at least you weren't being careful. And if you're honest, in this day and age, when people got COVID, you're like, how did you get that? You weren't being careful. You're associating with the wrong people. You weren't social distancing. You didn't wear your mask. You weren't quarantining. Whatever it was, you suspected. And this was true of him as well. He was seen as a threat. And to go near him is something that would be dangerous, but not for Jesus. He did something we all would have considered as unwise, unsafe. He risked exposure. Mark chapter 1, verse 41 tells us that moved with compassion, Jesus reached out and he touched him. I'm willing, he said. Be healed. Now, Jesus didn't have to touch him. He had healed plenty of other people without touching them, by just naming it or telling them to go wash in the Jordan River. Plenty of times Jesus made no physical contact with somebody, but Jesus delighted in reaching out to people who were distressed and who were downcast. And I believe in this specific situation, Jesus wanted to show that there wasn't anything to fear, that he didn't fear sickness. He didn't fear death. And instantly, the leprosy, it disappeared. And the man was healed. And now Jesus is telling him, look, you need to go straight to the priest, because in their society, the priest was the one that determined whether you were clean or unclean. He said, look, you need to go straight to the priest, tell the priest you need to pay this certain, it is sort of like a tax, but you need to go pay the priest, and then he'll declare you as clean. And we don't know why the man did this, but instead of going to do what Jesus said, it said that the man, the next verse tells us the man went spreading the word, proclaiming to everyone what had happened. He wanted everybody to know what Jesus had done for him. Now, maybe he was just completely grateful, or maybe he couldn't bear another moment being away from people and being isolated. Do you remember that moment when it was like, I don't have to be confined to my house anymore, and I can have human contact, and I can connect with people, and yeah, I can do that through Zoom, but I can be with people now. This ache of isolation may have been the thing, him being disconnected from society, was the ache that he was feeling that caused him to disregard what Jesus had instructed for him. Now, it's not the object condition of being separated from people. There's two different things when it comes to isolation. There's the object condition of being isolated, but it's not really that. That's not really the issue. It's not even that somebody created a law. It's not even that somebody mandated this. It's the subjective feeling that's a result of our objective condition. It's that lack of authentic connection. It's the lack of knowing and being known. It's the lack of physical contact. You know what's interesting about this guy? I find this fascinating that we know his issue, but we don't know his name. We know what his issue is, and his issue in many ways has become his identity. His identity to others, and even likely to himself, was wrapped up in his sickness, his disease, and his issue, what was wrong with him. Isn't it true that our issues sometimes, our inadequacies, our insecurities, our belief that we're unacceptable or unwanted, they have a way of leading us to self-isolation. Our issues, if I could put it this way, our issues are something that becomes so overwhelming that we identify with ourselves. We see other people maybe identify with us in small ways or in big ways, and those things change the way we see ourselves. And our issues influence our personal identity. And our identity, the way we see ourselves, causes us to isolate ourselves. Not always physically, but we isolate ourselves. We only let people see so much of what's going on. We only share so much of what's happening on the inside. And when we isolate ourselves, we find ourselves struggling and fighting and wrestling alone with our issues. If I can fix my issues, if I can get my issues cleaned up, that'll change who I am, that'll change my identity, and then I won't have to isolate. Problem is, it doesn't work for us. We have a hard time like fighting through that on our own, and it leads to loneliness, a feeling of powerlessness, sometimes uselessness and meaninglessness. Now, that didn't begin with the pandemic, but the effects of the pandemic have absolutely compounded it. And this social isolation has led to a spiritual isolation for a lot of people. There was a national study that was done by the Barna Group. They study churches, nonprofits, Christianity, people's thoughts and reactions and perceptions of Christianity across the nation. One of the studies they did in thousands of churches, across thousands of churches, they discovered that 32% of church attenders disconnected during the pandemic. Like not just, hey, I didn't watch as much or I didn't show up at the building, because most people didn't do that. It was like they completely unplugged and disconnected from their church during the pandemic. This social isolation led to a spiritual isolation, and it caused people to check out, not just on church, but for a lot of people on faith. And whether you know it or not, there's a new crisis of faith that's happening not just in our nation, but in our city, in our church. People wonder, why did this happen? How could this happen? Where was God in the midst of all that? That contributed. The isolation of people being away from and not being able to process with others, learn with others, learn about how God's involved and maybe working in the midst of this with other people has caused people to check out. And here's the interesting thing is, this is one of the enemy's key strategies. Whether you know it or not, one of the enemy's key strategies to attacking your life and bringing calamity and bringing brokenness and bringing hurt into your life is to isolate you. He tried to do this with Jesus. He succeeded with David. We could go on. You can see it over and over throughout the scriptures. When people were isolated, they were tempted. And oftentimes, their greatest regrets came from that season of isolations. Now, here's the thing. We can't let that happen. Now, this is why I'm talking about this today. Some of you are like, this is like a big downer. But this is where we start to come up from this, is because we can't let this happen. You can't let this happen. I can't let this happen. This is our responsibility. Here's what's happened in our society. We're no longer physically isolated, yet many people are relationally and spiritually isolated in ways they weren't before the pandemic. Maybe it's a combination of things that happened in the midst of the pandemic and the hurts and the habits and the hangups that developed during the pandemic or over the last 20 months as they were disconnected. Those are things the enemy is using to keep people in isolation. And here's the thing we came to recently as a staff. We came to this realization first that we've got to be more urgent. We have to be more intentional about reaching out. This is what Jesus did, right? To reaching out to those people who were isolated. And second, the second realization for us was that we couldn't do this without you. We need your help. Those of you who are connected, those of you who have reconnected, we can't do this alone. This isn't as much about attending the church as it is about being the church. And in this season, it's not my job. It's not the staff's job. Certainly, God's placed us in a role to create leadership, but this is our job. This is our church. These are people, some that maybe decided to step out, and they went and stepped into another church because we didn't meet for a longer period of time than some other churches. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about trying to get those people back to be a part of our church. I'm not worried. I'm worried more about like the sheep who strayed off that Jesus talked about. Who's gonna go after them? Who's gonna reach out to them? Who's gonna reach out to the people who used to sit by you, who used to be in your group, who used to serve next to you, who you used to connect with on a regular basis? I was talking to one guy a couple of weeks ago, and he told me that he came back to church after we regathered, and for 2 weeks he sat in the same section that he used to sit in, where he saw all these people that he used to know, and he didn't see one person in the section that he knew. And I said, what did you do about that? He goes, I just felt like this is so hard. Like, it feels like it's starting over. I said, what do you think happened to those people? He goes, I don't know. I probably should reach out to them. I don't know any of those people. I think maybe you should. I think that's what Jesus would do. And that's what I think we need to do. I think this short window we have as a church in this season, one of the most important things we can do is reach out to people who maybe have slipped out of our gathering. Now, there's several other churches with us today, and at your church, your lead pastor is gonna come at this point to talk about how you can partner, and specifically in your context, how you're gonna partner together in reaching out to people. So thanks for being with us. They're gonna pick it up from here at this time. Specifically for us here at Buckhead Church, I just wanna have some real talk for a second today. I want you to know everything that I know. People are slipping out the back door of church and faith. Now, this is gonna shock some of you, but I don't mean this for shock value. I just mean it for pulling the curtain back for a second so you can see behind the scenes. We have 4,136 households that we figured out that were connected in some way. They were in a group, they were attending, or they were serving here at Buckhead Church prior to the pandemic that we have not seen or heard from since the pandemic. 4,136 households. About 50% of adult attenders at Buckhead Church are single adults. About 50% are married adults. So you don't have to do any math today. I'll do the math for you. 2/3 of the people in these households, half of these households, but 2/3 of the people represented here are single adults who may not be connected to a faith community or anybody even in their own home that's helping them and encouraging them and challenging them to continue in their faith. Now again, if for people that found a new church home, the churches down the street, they're our teammates. I don't see any competition whatsoever. They're connected to a faith community. I feel like there's somebody there that cares for them, that's shepherding them. But if they're not, and they've slipped out the door and they're the one sheep that's wandered off, I think it's our job. I think it's our responsibility. I think it's good stewardship for us to reach out. And here's what I know. A single point of regathering, like our weekend service, it will not solve that problem. It will not solve that challenge. That, hey, by the way, we've reopened our doors. Everybody all come back now. It's not gonna happen. I mean, people's patterns have changed. People's lives have changed. Their habits have changed. People have found themselves in different situations and different circumstances. And that's why we want to offer a multifaceted strategy for doing this. And so our team has created all sorts of different entry points for people to regather with us, both in person and online, to reconnect people. And between now and the end of the year, we have a concerted effort that we're doing to reach out to people, and we're gonna ask you to join us in it. And yes, I'm gonna give you another QR code in just a second, but here's the thing we've done is we wanna help people regather and reconnect and re-engage with us. There's all sorts of things to attend. Like in this Christmas season, like there's gonna be a bunch of new things for people to come to and people to join in. There's new groups that are starting. We want people to reconnect. Maybe there's somebody that was previously a part of your group before that you haven't seen them in a while. This is the time to reach out and make sure that person's okay. Make sure that they're not straying or they're not wandering off. And then some of you, you used to serve alongside some people. And for a while it was like, hey, I don't feel comfortable coming back. And yeah, you know, I'm concerned about the pandemic and I'm certainly sensitive to that. One of our benchmarks is that we were waiting for the cases to get below 100 out of 100,000. And many of you know, you watch these things, it's gone below that. And so towards the beginning of the year, we're gonna relax a little bit more on some of our policies. But I want you to know, we're wanting people to regather and reconnect and re-engage. And we need your help. There's all sorts of offerings. If you'll click on this QR code, you can do it now. It'll be on the screens at the end of the service as well. There's all sorts of ways for people to participate. Even if you're brand new and you're going, hey, I didn't disconnect, but I was never connected. That was Chantel's story. You heard her story in the baptism. This was her story. She was looking to get connected. She knew she needed a community. She found us through social media. She sent us a message and somebody reached out to her. And they reached out to her and they lifted her out of isolation, and she's so grateful. Now, here's the thing. If you're here, you're watching online, and you found yourself in this place, and you found yourself where you feel like you're isolated and you haven't checked out of your faith, you're not turned your back on God, but you know you're at risk. You know that you're isolated. Here's the thing, you're gonna hear from us. And you're likely, if you've been connected here before, you likely have already heard from us. here's what I want you to know. We're not trying to just get you to attend the church. We want to be the church to you. We want to encourage you. We want to lift you up. This is the scriptures. It's throughout the scriptures. It's about the one another's, bearing one another's burdens, lifting one another up, speaking the truth to one another, gathering with one another. This is what we're going to do. And here's the thing. Some of you, if you're not feeling isolated, you're already connected. You're going, hey, I don't feel this tension. Great. We need your help. We do. We need to lock arms with you and to reach out to people, some of the people that were previously connected. Here's one of the things I want you to know. I have received so many encouraging messages in recent weeks. So many messages from people who came back. Some of you jumped back in, you heard about the mega awesome costume party, and you're like, my kids aren't missing that. I gotta get back for that. And it was the first time you came back to church. Guess what? It worked. That's one of the things we did. You're like, hey, how do we draw some of these people back? Because here's one of the things. I've had so many conversations with parents who have kids who are going, oh yeah, we watch every week. And some of you are going, you haven't heard from me, you haven't seen me, but I watch every week. Here's the thing. If you have kids at home, they're not receiving anything from that. And yeah, maybe they watch online some, but all the research shows that it's actually relationships. It's kids needing relationships outside of their home with people like you, intergenerational relationships. That's why it's so valuable that so many of you serve. And it's why we need you to jump back in serving in our next gen environments with our preschoolers and our children and our middle school and high school students. It's because that relational connection is what leads to a faith that lasts. The research proves it. Maybe this is why the Apostle Paul in the first century, he penned the words, do not give up the habit of meeting together. Many have gotten out of the habit. And it's not about filling up a room, just so you know, hear my heart. This isn't about filling up a room. This is about when you get out of the habit of meeting together and connecting with people, you get isolated, and then you're at risk. If you're connected with another community or you have a group of people, great, that's awesome. But my question is, what would it look like for those people who are isolated if we did for them what Jesus did for this leper, maybe what someone else did for us? What if we were to reach out to people who were isolated and draw them back in? I want to go back to the end of the story, Mark chapter 1. We left off here. The man went and spread the word, proclaiming to everyone what had happened. This is my favorite part of the story. As a result, look at this. Large crowds soon surrounded Jesus. Large crowds surrounded Jesus, and he couldn't publicly enter a town anywhere. He had to stay out in the secluded places. But people from everywhere kept coming to him. Look, you need to hear this. I'm not delusional. There's nothing magical about this place, about our teaching, about our environments. I think we've learned some things about how to connect with people. But what we're trying to do, all of our efforts are around connecting people to Jesus. He's the only one that changes everything for everyone. What would it look like for each of us to take responsibility for reaching out and getting in touch and helping other people reconnect with Jesus? If you found yourself isolated and you're out in secluded places, here's what I want you to hear today. That's where Jesus hangs out. And he's reaching out to you today. And so are we. He's reaching out to you and he wants to connect with you, and so do we. You belong here. Don't brush that aside. I mean it. You belong here even without having all your stuff together. You belong here even without believing everything we believe. You belong here regardless of where you've been, what you've done, or where you're coming from. You belong here because Jesus came to reach out to everyone. Let's pray together. God, I pray in this season you would help us to know what it is personally for each one of us to be the church. to be your hands and feet, to take up a responsibility and not just to be a consumer, but to be a partner, to be a contributor, to be someone who is the actual, as you said your body would be, is the actual representation of Jesus, who would reach out to and would connect with and would draw people back into your community of faith, where they could be encouraged, they would be built up, where other people could bear their burdens, where other people could keep them from being isolated and tempted from the enemy to step into or to make decisions or to walk a path that they'll later regret, a path that'll lead them to death and destruction in their life. God, I pray that you would help each one of us to know what our role is, what our responsibility is. And then you would give us the perseverance to prioritize that. You give us the wisdom to choose to participate in that. God, I pray for somebody today who just walked back in the building for the first time, or was watching online, and they feel like they're a part of a sea of people, but they feel alone. God, I pray you give them the courage to reach out. I pray maybe today, supernaturally, you would nudge somebody around them to reach out to them, to connect with them, to invite them in, so they wouldn't feel alone, they wouldn't be at risk. And ultimately, there's somebody who could find this thriving life that you promised each one of us when you said, I came that they might have life and they might have it to the full, this fullness of life. I believe you gave us each other to walk that path and to encourage each other along that way. And so I just pray that we would be the church in an extraordinary way in this season, and crowds, scores, thousands of people would come around and regather around you, Jesus, and experience the power that you have for each one of us to lead us to the best that you have for us in this life and in the life to come. And I pray in Jesus' name, amen.
We live for you. Oh, we
Thank you for that, Tan. Thank you. You know, we really do believe that the most important thing that we can build our life on is Jesus. And so our opportunities for you to be able to regather and reconnect and re-engage are to help you to begin to do that. And so if you are looking for a chance to take a step today, in the lobby when you leave, our teams from Womberland, our preschool environment, and Upstreet, our elementary school environment, they are out in the lobby with coffee. And they would love to just talk to you about what it would look like to serve in one of their environments over a cup of coffee. And if that is maybe not the next step for you, then we're going to put the QR code that Joel had in his message. We're going to put it back on the screen because we would love for all of you to be able to look through all of the opportunities for what it may look like for you to regather, reconnect, and re-engage with our church. Whatever step you take, we hope that all of you will take a step to reconnect and that you would even bring someone else along with you. Thank you so much for being with us. We hope you have an incredible week, and we will see you next Sunday.